Welcome to The Quo, a community of challengers, disruptors, and changemakers. I'm your host, Payal Patel. Join me as I dive into stories at the intersection of gender, race, and social and economic issues. This podcast series spotlights individuals from various industries, disciplines, and walks of life who are challenging the status quo. Through interesting and thought-provoking conversations, The Quo aims to elevate the voices and stories of endeavoring change agents in hopes of empowering communities and inspiring meaningful change within our society through education, advocacy, and the power of storytelling. Are you ready? Let's get it. A warm hello and welcome to the Quohort. This is episode 2. I'm so grateful that you've decided to tune in and join the community. This little passion project of mine has been on my heart and mind for a while now, and as you may have gathered from the first episode, hope you've had a chance to tune in, I felt there was a strong need for more inclusive content and media representation. So I'm super excited to finally bring this project to fruition, and I hope that you'll find value in the content that comes out of it. I'll try to do my best every time I get behind this microphone. You know, it's actually been a while since I've been on the other end of a microphone. Usually I'm the interviewee as part of what I do for work, but I prefer to point it in the other direction. See, I originally set out to be a journalist because I wanted to tell the stories of other people, especially those we can all draw inspiration from as we work on becoming the best versions of ourselves. And to that end, from the moment I launched The Quo, I had given a lot of thought as to who I wanted to serve as my first guest. I wanted to kick this thing off with someone who truly represented what challenging the status quo looks like. And there was just one name that just kept coming back to my mind. And when you meet her, you'll truly understand why. But before I get into the interview, I'm going to gush on her a little bit because, well, that's what we do at The Quo. So let me introduce you to Bushra Amiwala. She is an activist, speaker, and youth icon. She's the youngest Muslim elected official in the United States, the first Pakistani Muslim person to make it on a Cook County ballot. Cook County is one of the largest counties in Illinois, by the way. Chicago actually falls in Cook County. The youngest person to make it on a Cook County ballot at the age of 21. She's a world-renowned speaker. She's given several TED Talks. She's spoken at a few universities, in fact, as well, including Harvard, you know, that little school on the East Coast that no one knows about. Anyway, she's also appeared in several notable magazines, including Time Magazine, and was named a College Woman of the Year by Glamour magazine. She's also been the subject of a few documentaries, such as She Could Be Next on PBS, Our America, Women Forward on ABC and Hulu, and Run, the series, on Amazon Prime. And of course, she's won many awards for her exemplary community service. Boy, that's quite a resume, am I right? And what's wild is that she's just getting started. But to me, she's already the epitome of someone who's challenging the status quo. And so as you can imagine, I was so excited when she agreed to come on the show. She's got quite a story. I mean, in this episode alone, we talk about her path to public office, how we can better navigate political discussions in this currently very divided and polarizing climate, how to be unapologetic about who you are. I mean, she's so good at this. And we also touched on how to be better allies to the Muslim and refugee community, especially right now as the devastating events continue to unfold in Afghanistan. And we talk about so much more. So, you know what? Let me stop here because the story is better told by the woman living it. So without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Bushra Amiwala. Welcome, Bushra. Thank you so much for being willing to be one of the brave first ones for this community.
Of course. It is such an incredible honor. Thank you so much for having me, Pyle, and seeing the intro that you had, the snippets, and all that this podcast is going to be. It's more than just that. It sounds like it's going to be a wonderful community and place for people to connect. So I'm so thrilled to be a part of it and very humbled to be your first guest.
Oh, thank you. That warms my heart. And I'm so excited to kick off with you. So I do want to dive right in because I have so many questions for you. There's so much to unpack with your background, clearly, as I listed off all the accomplishments of your resume. But I think where I want to begin is with the obvious of what you do, because it's incredible, that you ran for office as a college freshman. And I think you are the living example of what's possible for other people, because obviously at that young of an age, not a lot of people think about running for public office. And I think a lot of the things that you've reinforced in your messaging out in the community is that, one, why not me? And two, that there hasn't been much representation, especially of people that look like you. So I guess where I want to start is, what inspired you to make that run for public office at that point in your life?
That is such a phenomenal and thought-provoking question. And I feel like one that is always my favorite to answer, just because people never expect the journey and where that all came from. But growing up, I wasn't really that interested in politics. So I was sort of limited in my viewpoint in our elected officials, what governance looks like, and things of that sort. And it wasn't until my senior year of high school, when I took an AP Government and Politics class, where I finally had discussion of what politics entails, who our elected officials are, what that process looks like. And at the time, it was December of 2015 / almost 2016. So a lot of my friends shared on who they'd be voting to be our president, which really piqued a bit of interest in me. And I wanted to get a firsthand look of what it meant to be Republican in particular. I felt as though I had a very skewed perspective and narrative of what it looks like to be affiliated with that party. And I feel like that I had like a narrow mind when it came to that. So I wanted to get a firsthand look of what it meant to be Republican. So I decided to work for the most powerful Republican in the state of Illinois, who was our U.S. Senator at the time, Senator Mark Kirk. And while interning on his campaign, I actually got the most survey results. We were collecting survey data from people in the community that later Kirk would shape policy around. And I guess that to me didn't really mean much. I was like, oh, I got the most survey results. Like, that's cool, right? That's cute. But didn't know what else to make of that. And the people and the organizers on that campaign saw leadership ability and potential in me that I definitely did not see in myself at the time as an 18-year-old. And they asked me to run for public office. And few months later, gave it a bunch of thought and realized that the best way to make long-term tangible change is through public policy. So I was super involved in nonprofit work and things of that sort. So I found that this was a tangible way to take it to the next level. And the interest came from someone honestly asking me to do something like this. And it was a way to bridge what I was already doing work in the community to the next level of advocacy and policy work.
Oh, wow. I love that. And I love that at that moment, especially at that age, that you had put that much thought and that kind of thought into it. Because as a college freshman, I ran for student council president, and I thought that was like super overwhelming. So for you to make that big of a leap at that point in your life is truly inspiring. Now, I know that you had actually run for a different position first, and that didn't quite pan out, right? And then you ran again. So after that first moment of defeat in that sense, how did you muster up the courage and confidence to run again?
So on my first election night, the very first time I ran for public office, I had an election watch party, and I had a couple of like pretty big news outlets come out just in anticipation to see the results come in. A lot of people were like, oh my God, like she has a chance, like she has a shot, like she could possibly make history. We want to be there to cover it. And I lost. I didn't win. I didn't get elected. And they were all still there. All the cameras were on me. Like, people wanted to know, like, are you going to run again? Are you going to do this again? And I was like, no, I do not plan on running for office again. I was so discouraged in that moment. I'd seen a year and a half's worth of hard work. To me, in the moment, made it seem like, oh, wow, this went to waste, right? But there were so many other ways that that hard work came into fruition that I saw over time, which I think was a sense of coming to terms with what loss and what failure looks like. Did a lot of reflection on that. And actually, the person that I ran against, him and I got breakfast a week after the election, and he said that, you know, the way that I was able to run my campaign was inspiring to him. And he hadn't had to come out and campaign for himself in the 16 years that he had held this seat. And the challenge that I'd put up really led him to show up to the polls as well. And it was something for me to be really proud about too. So he actually encouraged me to run for public office again. And the first time I ran for the Cook County Board of Commissioners. And the second time I ran for the Board of Education. So education is always something I was passionate about. It was always a core part of my story. The difference between the two education systems that I saw growing up became a guiding principle for me. So to give back to the educational community that really shaped me into who I am was a very practical and tangible next step. And the courage came from outside in. It was from my mentors, the people that believed in me, from my parents, my family, my friends, and all of the above. And I think people find sources of energy from different avenues. But for me, it was definitely from those that saw me in a positive light and vision and believed in me despite and regardless of the outcome of my first election.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. It just further highlights the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people, right? The people who are going to inspire you, uplift you, and the moments that you're down and out are going to lend a hand and pick you up and encourage you to go again. So I'm so glad that you had that kind of network, and that you ran. And you're also a perfect example of what happens when you keep going, because you did it, you made it, and you're an elected official now, and a very needed, and also so awesome to be one of the first of everything that you are, right? That all your identifiers. That's so incredibly inspiring. So one of the things that's also inspiring about you that I had heard you say is that there are so many people who will question your abilities. So just make sure that you don't question yourself. And that really resonated with me, because I find myself questioning myself all the time. And I'm like, there's enough people around me doing that. So I need to be more confident in who I am and my abilities and make sure that I don't go there. But that is also such a hard thing to do. So how do you do it? And how do you drown out all that noise around you that could potentially impact how you feel inside?
You know, I'm someone who, people get surprised when I say this, but I'm someone who I think has a lot of imposter syndrome and insecurity within that I carry with me. And in spite of that, do the things that I do. And confidence is a really tricky topic, right? Something that we all are able to sort of not fake, but to emulate despite it not being there sometimes. And I think the best piece of advice that I would give, especially when doing something that is in the public eye, such as running for public office, you sign yourself up for scrutiny. It's despite not wanting it. And what's interesting is that since I was running for a seat that was at such a local level within my hometown of Skokie, the second time I ran for public office, both times I was running, I got national media attention. So I had people from states that, you know, frankly speaking, my election was irrelevant to them, yet they had so much skin in the game. They had so much negativity they wanted to project onto me in my campaign, and they would do it by leaving mean comments on Facebook, or they would do it by sending hate mail. They would do it by sending nasty worded emails. And I'm not sure if it was like a cathartic experience for them or where that came from, but drowning out the negativity and the noise like that, what's interesting is those types of comments hurt less than the comments that are microaggression and the comments that come from what people think is a place of good intent. Because the person that sends that blatant negative comment, it's like, oh, well, they just want to see my downfall. Like, it's easy. Maybe they're having a bad day, whatever that may be. But the people who you would think have your best interest at heart, hearing them doubt you, or hearing them question your ability, or hearing them question whether you're doing the right thing, that I think hurts more. And I think, how do you balance that act, and how do you balance navigating those relationships during times like this? Which is why I always say it's really important to have your own personal board of directors around you, your own personal person who's good at finances, your own person who's good at perhaps knowing the law. You never know when that needs to come up. Someone who believes in you, someone who is there to build you up emotionally, and someone who's there to challenge you. I think it's so important to have all these different backgrounds and elements surrounding you to keep you grounded, because there will be plenty of people and naysayers, but don't say no to yourself. Go for that opportunity, run for public office, apply for that job, seek that promotion, write that book, start that podcast, whatever that may be for yourself. Don't say no to yourself. Let someone else say no to you, I would say.
Yes. Oh gosh, that resonates so much with me and with a lot of people I believe in my network. We've had a lot of conversations around that. Imposter syndrome, got that for days for myself, right? I'm like, well, who am I to start a podcast? Like, yes, I identify as a storyteller, but what makes me the authority on anything? And then those narrative points drive a lot of doubts within me, and I'm sure within a lot of people. And so I also wanted to touch on the fact that while, yes, it's so amazing that you're the youngest to do A, B, and C and all that, but with that also comes another layer of doubt, right? Because people might be doubting your level of experience, or saying that, oh, but how can we take her seriously? She doesn't really know anything yet. She's still really young, or, that perception. How have you fought that along the way? Because I'm sure that's probably something that seeped into some minds.
So what I find particularly interesting is a lot of time people ask me, Bushra, you face racism, sexism, Islamophobia, and ageism, and which would you say is the worst? And a lot of people, I think, ask me about ageism in particular, right? People perceiving you as incapable of doing something specifically due to your age. And with that, there are many assumptions that come with that too, but I definitely think I've been most impacted by sexism for sure, like just being a woman. So it's not that I'm just young. I'm a young woman. It's not that I'm just Muslim. I'm a Muslim woman. So that intersection of that identity I found has been a bit more of a distraction than everything else. But specifically touching on the age component, I had this, when I first ran for public office, I was 19 at the time, and I had like this beautiful articulated response for when anyone would come up to me and question my experience, my ability to serve, the narrative that I bring to the table. And frankly speaking, that never came up. A lot of people, when talking to me, wouldn't know that I was 19 years old. And so it was almost easy to mask my age. So because of that, I didn't face it as much, but I was very prepared to face it because I would see the way that people would talk about people in their teens and the way that they're passionate about different issues, like, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about. And that super dismissive mindset. And I think it ties into what we were talking about earlier about not letting someone else be that sounding board, being that like grounding person that like rejects you, your ideas and mentality. But it can be really challenging. But thankfully, I didn't experience it as much. But what I did face a lot was that sexism component. People reducing me to my womanhood, to my identity as a woman. That I think became a bit more of a distracting factor to a lot of people. But thankfully, the age thing didn't come up as much. I think I internalized it a lot while holding public office because I'm sitting around a table with a lot of parents whose children are in the school district that I now serve on, and I'm being the only one who doesn't have a child in the district. And I was 21 at the time when I got elected on the Board of Education, and I was able to say things like, well, when I was a student not too long ago, because a lot of the same teachers are still there, here's how I would feel when, for example, while being on free and reduced lunch. Here's how I would feel when, the bus system would function in this way. Like certain concepts, like that perception is so valuable, and it's honing in on being a master on your one niche. You don't have to be a master on a ton of different topics. And I think I branded myself as the former student, and that's a perception and narrative that I bring. So it's honing in down on that, I think, is a really good way to navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that you brought up the sexism piece because that is where I was headed next. So yes, there's a lot of intersection for you here, right? Because there's, once again, I said there's multiple identifiers for you as part of what you do. And so my next question was actually going to be, around your campaign experience, especially because the first time you ran against a man, and I'm sure that there were some things that maybe he was asked that you weren't, or vice versa. And I believe I've read somewhere that a lot of the focus was on your clothing, your fashion choices, rather than your policy and platform. So how did you overcome that specifically?
That was super challenging just because I wasn't expecting it. I would see it at the national level when people would talk about Hillary Clinton in her pantsuits, and I was shocked that it was something that I was facing at the local level, running for public office in my hometown. So, for example, there was a debate between my two male opponents and I the first time I was running for public office. And in that debate, there was a news article that highlighted this debate, and it talked about the two policy ideas that each male opponent presented. And it said, and Bushra Amiwala wore a stylish light pink hijab to the forum. And that is all it said about me, what I was wearing. And something like that, like, it's appalling because it's like, wow, like this, when people go to cast their vote and ballot, they'll remember the two policy ideas that each man presented, and they'll see my name and be like, stylish pink hijab, right? So all of that to say, I used social media as the tool to get my message out there. It was like, this will be my vehicle to hone in on my own platform. And this is the one platform where I get to control the narrative, where I get to speak true to myself. So I shared that article on my Facebook page. And I said, by the way, here are my policy platform ideas on the three topics that are highlighted on here. It's a shame that only the fact that I was wearing a pink hijab is what came up. And that went mini viral within the community, and it was a great way for me to get my message out there. And it was like a smart like marketing tactic, and I learned little tips and tricks along the way about how to work with the different algorithms on social media. But social media, I truly believe that I helped coin and shape the way that politicians specifically use social media platforms to break down that third layer and to be a bit more personable on there. So everything from the events that I would go out, I would always share pictures afterwards, to posting kind of low quality videos of myself, just sharing how I feel about certain things. I feel like a lot of people found me to be a lot more approachable because of that. And it could have been really easy for me to hide behind the magazine covers and the newspapers and the articles. But I didn't want that. I wanted to truly have complete agency and ownership over my brand. And I think social media really helped me navigate that whenever something wasn't going in accordance to the way that I wanted it to.
Yeah, no, that's a great part about social media, right? There's pros and cons. Obviously, the cons could be the troll culture that you alluded to earlier, but it does also lend itself in a really great way when you can directly communicate with your potential voters and get your message out to them without any sort of filter through other forms of media. So I think when done right, and I think you're an example of that, it can really pay off in a big way, which is awesome to see. I think the other part of social media is that it's also appealing to a new generation, right? That I feel like politics is something that the young community is starting to get involved in, but it obviously it takes a little bit of work, and there has been a lot of taboo associated with politics, right? It's felt dirty, especially living in Chicago. There's always been this like dirty connection to politics, and so sometimes people are like, no, I don't want to talk about politics. I know I have that within my own network. Like, I don't want to talk about this. It's too polarizing, which can be true, obviously, in today's climate. But why should people care about politics? Why should they get involved?
I think it is so important to focus in on politics, especially at the local level, where everything is at stake, where everything impacts us directly, from the potholes that we see on the streets to the parking permits that we need in front of our houses to just getting support when needed, when there's a tree that falls after a terrible tornado like we just saw. All of that is in the hands of our government, specifically our local government. And I think we sometimes forget how much power is held at the local level. It's really easy to see what happens at the national level and feel out of touch, feel like there's nothing you can do to make an impact or a difference at that scale. But I think that's a really daunting place to start. I think it makes sense to start from bottom up. And I think when people talk about politics, they oftentimes get bogged down by what's happening at that top and high level, and they get distracted by all that there is change that is able to be made at the local level. So I think that the best way is to meet people where they're at and to share some of the tangible things that government is able to do for them. So some cool examples are everything such as like helping get your passport renewed to giving out free school supplies is done at the township level or at the aldermanic level. And people don't even know that these services are available. So I think it's breaking down that barrier, speaking about everything that happens. And I feel like I glow about all that government can do for us. Just because you're right, it has become tainted as this dirty scheme that only a certain type of person who perhaps is, whether it be like narcissistic or greedy, these people get involved in politics. And we as a society need to really reshape that narrative, not only for ourselves, but for the next generation, because politics isn't something that should exclude any type of people. It truly, we are elected to represent folks such as day-to-day individuals and everyone of themselves. So yeah, it does make me sad to see that perception. And I think the best way to overcome that is to break down the barrier and the mold, because it's not just taking a picture with your local elected official when you see them at an event, but it's challenging them and asking them why they voted the way that they did in the most recent board meeting. It's engaging with them in their town hall when they choose to have that. And it's showing up, writing letters, keeping in contact, and keeping our elected officials accountable and in check. And I think it's always remembering that there's checks and balances in place.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I preach this to my network all the time of my friends and family, that we can't just be voting during the presidential elections, right? We have to care about the local elections, our state, our city, things that are happening. That's probably impacting us a lot more and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be voting as at the national level too. Absolutely should be voting across all the levels. And you're right, the day-to-day that's happening, that's in the power of our local leaders. And so we have a lot of power to put those people into office based on their policies and what they plan to deliver. And then the second part of it is holding them accountable to the platform they ran on. So for sure, with you all the way on that. The other aspect of politics right now is that there's great division, right? Because the last few years has been very polarizing. It's created a split that is glaring, and there's just so much. There's this really toxic energy around it that's been built. So how can we navigate this political climate right now and work together to foster a more healthy discussion around politics when we're just talking among our friends and family?
I think it's really easy to want to engage in the differences component, but I always say work backwards. Start with the similarities, because I think the people that do the most well when they're campaigning, when they're running for public office, are the people that talk about, children and education and family and these core tenets that we all actually do value at the end of the day and hold, I feel like, for the most part, across the board in similar manners and fashions, right? I think when we get into the nitty gritty behind certain concepts and theories and philosophies, that's where things start to get messy. But it's also understanding that agree to disagree isn't the most productive answer, but sometimes it actually is, especially when you're working within friends and networks. But I think it's not, I think what's most important is to not take things personally and to do your best to not make sure that you are tainting another person as a certain way or generalizing what their thoughts or beliefs are because they stand on a certain side of the spectrum, which is similar to why I decided to work for a Republican senator when I was clearly only surrounded by Democratic views and values, because I saw that the media had shaped my perception of this party in a certain way. So it's stepping out of your comfort zone. It's engaging in those difficult conversations. It's recognizing facts where facts are correct and due. And we shouldn't be ambassadors to change someone's idea on a spectrum if that change is not a practical one that needs to be made. And I think that sometimes we get caught up, especially on like Thanksgiving dinner, for example. It's like, I want to convince, my one uncle that this is wrong or why his stance on this is not appropriate. But is that the best use of your energy? I'm not sure. To some people it may be, and it may be a rewarding experience. But at the end of the day, I learned at a very young age that there will be people's thoughts and beliefs that I cannot change. And instead of putting my time, effort, and energy on that, I would rather push the narrative, push the needle forward on things that I can and do have control over. And that's actually a much better use of my time, effort, and energy too. So being intentional and mindful about that.
Yeah, for sure. I am a firm believer that there's more that brings us together than divides us, right? There's a lot more that we can come together on. And I think it would serve us all better if we focus on that, and that's what we bring to the table, and then have some productive discussions around, okay, well, these are the differences in our values, but that we can still have a dialogue around it and advance the core aspects of what we're trying to achieve. At the end of the day, we all want to make things better, right? We just want to have a better society. We're working towards the same goal. It's just our approaches can be different.
And I think the most powerful part about what you just said was productive conversation, right? Because sometimes these conversations, it's like, well, what was the point of that? But that productive element, I think, is super smart that you call that out.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. That brings me to just, I love how much you own who you are. I mean, every step of the way, you just claim every bit of and piece of who you are. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. So how do you get unapologetic about who you are?
That is such a good question, and actually one that I've never been asked before. So this is going to be a very candid response to that.
Yeah.
I think from the beginning, especially when I first stepped into running for public office and started getting a bit of like media attention, and my story was in the hands of other people at that point, right? I would give like a 15-20 minute interview and I would read the write-up article, and there would sometimes be disconnect between what we talked about and what was presented, because you lose that agency over what you're sharing. So to be unapologetically yourself is to it's to not tiptoe around your stance or position on things. It's to be bold in where you stand at the table, and it's to not fret challenges. I think a lot of people who are still a bit unsure about where they stand or how to not be unapologetically themselves, it's because that challenge component can be one that's quite intimidating. But I definitely would recommend that a challenge shouldn't be something to be scared of. It's also, if someone challenges you, your thoughts, your beliefs, that is not a reflection of you. Sometimes it's more of a reflection of them. So it's understanding that there are many different elements that come into play with that. But I figured if everyone's talking about my identity anyways, I may as well talk about it too, and the way that this actually advances the policy ideas that I have, and why this actually makes me a bit more qualified to speak on certain issues and topics. So I feel like a lot of my early childhood, I used to put it in a box and keep it on the side and not touch it as much. But when I started wearing the hijab, I realized my identity is everywhere. It's not a necklace I can tuck into my shirt. It's not a bracelet I can hide under my sleeve, but it's a hijab that's on my head that I chose to wear, that represents my religious identity and affiliation, specifically being a religious minority in the United States. Being unapologetic about it is the only way to navigate it, because otherwise people will try to control your narrative, which has happened to me before. But when you're so unapologetically yourself, there's no denying your story, your narrative, your platform, and your ideology. And I think that's the best way to stay true to yourself and to represent yourself in your most authentic self and version too.
Yeah, I think that's a message that a lot of people need to hear. It's as someone who struggled with it herself, right? There have been times where I've pushed back on my cultural identities just because of where I grew up and the circumstances around me. Living here, sometimes you want to conform to what is depicted as an American, and that has showed up in the media in many different ways. But growing up, not seeing myself represented a lot in some of the media, I had to obviously go to Indian American, specific groups or turn to Indian media to see that. So then a lot of times I would be just very turned off from representing my culture. And that was hard. Something I struggled with for years. And I finally came around to owning it. I'm like, yep, no, this is who I am. There was a point in my life where I wore colored contacts. I dyed my hair. I wore makeup a couple of shades lighter than my skin tone. And so all of that has manifested in, who I am today. I've come to realize that I need to own who I am. And once I live in my truth, I can put an authentic representation out there and then build sort of a new way and a new representation in the media as well. In my role, I'm a public facing person, so I shouldn't try to suppress what is outwardly represented. That way it empowers the next Indian American girl watching TV and seeing me. So I'm so glad that that's what you're doing, and you're in a public facing role and are living your truth in every sense of the word.
That's so beautiful to hear that from you and your journey and how you overcame a lot of that, but also it's a quite vulnerable place to be able to share, like, this is how I used to feel and this is how I used to combat what my internalized, whatever that may be or look like. And a lot of it comes from things that we've seen. Again, not seeing yourself represented in a space is the most difficult space to enter in, and you are crushing it and doing that. And it's so sweet to hear that you are that face for so many other young South Asian girls, boys, people. They will see you and they will recognize that. And yes, they truly will hold in their own power and identity.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's why I said that at the very top of the show, that you're a living example of what is possible for other people. And I have to keep that in mind for myself as well, that what we're doing, we're making it possible for others once they see that it's what's in front of them, right? So love it. It's so beautiful. Which brings me to a bit of a difficult topic, but I want to touch on it in light of recent events. And it's a platform that you've mentioned as part of who you are and what you represent too. But I know that in the past you've said that most refugees are Muslim and they're often viewed as terrorists. And I know that in my own personal experience, I've also heard that and found that to be true. And I think that there's just so much wrongful, there's so many wrongful narratives around this. And so how can we as a society get better at changing that narrative and that association of refugees and Muslims to terrorism? And what are some tangible steps that the non-Muslim community members can take to change that?
Mm-hmm. That's such a powerful question, and I'm so glad that you asked it. I think the destigmatization and demystifying this community, it is way more effective and powerful if it's more than just the Muslim community that is doing it. Because if you see people that, for example, I personally don't identify with the refugee community. I was born and raised in the United States. None of my family has been displaced from their home country or land, yet it's still something that I'm vocal about and speak out about and do my very best to shed light on, whether it be something as small and tangible as sharing a post on my Instagram story, because you never know who will see your post and whose perception will be challenged in a certain way. And I think sometimes everything from signing a petition to donating online to posting something on social media, those three core tangible steps I found are actually the most effective way of organizing for any issue that our society faces on a global scale, whether it be a local scale. We've seen it in so many movements. And those are the three go-to things that I always say are tangible things that we can do today, that we can do right now, that does make an impact and does make a difference. But it's being everyday leaders in our own spheres of influences and social circles and demystifying that when we hear it said by someone close to us. I think that is a very, similar to what you said, productive method of breaking that perception down with people around you, as opposed to getting really frustrated by what's happening and understanding that certain things are out of our control, but what is in our control is what's around us and what we're surrounded and encapsulated by. So I definitely think that even something as small as posting on social media does go a really far way, because you're affirming your stance on something. You are speaking out against what you believe is true. And again, you don't know who will come across that post. Posts go viral instantaneously and can become in front of the eyes of the president of the United States, even, for example, right? And I think that's the power that we should sometimes, that I think a lot of us forget that we have in our hands. So that's the power of digital mobilizing and organizing at that scale and level. But that's definitely why I do try to speak out in support of the refugee community. It's understanding the empathy that many refugees have come to the United States and are now our lawyers, doctors, change makers, policymakers, educators, and they identify with that community. And I also think that there is also many that came to the US and maybe did not get their bearings or footings in that way. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But it's a very unfortunate situation to be in, to be displaced from where you live. And I think that sense of empathy is one that I try to spread a lot, that it's not the fault of the person that we're blaming. And especially the situation that we're seeing right now, the refugees, they are victims of terrorism, not the perpetuants of that said terrorism.
Yeah, right. No, I know. I think you hit it spot on with empathy. I think our world can always use more empathy. And by the way, thank you so much for answering this question, because I know it's a very sensitive topic with the refugee community right now, especially with everything going on around the world, and in Afghanistan specifically. But I think it's important to discuss, because right now I'm seeing a lot of statements come out on social media, and while I believe that there's power in words, it doesn't carry the power when there isn't action behind it. And I know some people do want to help and they just don't know how. So just knowing where to begin with this type of situation, and this applies to a lot of other communities, is so helpful in hearing it from someone who has a direct link to that community. So thank you for answering that question. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
So I also want to ask you about, this is relevant to this topic that we just discussed. There's also a lot of pain that comes out of these types of issues, right? How do you turn pain into purpose? Because I found that sometimes the things that I hear in the media, things that are even said to me directly, can be super painful, and then sitting with it, and it can really bog you down. But I want to be productive about it. I want to take action. And so the quote is one of the ways I'm doing it. But what are some ways that people listening and watching can turn their pain into purpose, kind of the way that you did?
I think the easiest way to turn pain or any sort of trauma into purpose is this is going to sound kind of cheesy, but it's by volunteering. I really think volunteering is actually something that anyone and everyone who has time can do. So it's volunteering your time, your effort, your energy, your talents. This is something greater than yourself. So for me, the generational pain and trauma that was passed on through my dad's upbringing, who was raised extremely impoverished, didn't have access to adequate education, faced issues of hunger, those became core tenets of what I found myself volunteering in issue-wise. I found myself volunteering at a tutoring center that tutored students and families who came from low-income backgrounds that perhaps didn't have access to those tutoring services, to serving a hot plate of food to every person that walked in through the door at the organization that I worked with, and everything in between. So it's truly a way to go full circle. And it's like, here's what I'm doing, the ripple effect that I'm leaving in the world as a result of something that once impacted me, or impacted a loved one, or impacted someone close to me, or something that just impacted me that I saw online. And I want to know what to do with this. I think so many of us have that inclination inside, but like don't know how to truly have that come out into fruition. And I talk about volunteering all the time because it's not something you should only do when you're in high school because you need service hours, or when you're in college because you might need to do it for a class. But I think integrating volunteerism is a very powerful tool that we all can integrate into our day-to-day lives, even if it's 1 to 2 hours a month. Like that makes a huge impact and difference, whether it be being an ad hoc volunteer for different boards of nonprofit organizations, whether it be volunteering at respective events that are one and done. It's a really fulfilling and gratifying experience, and to have it be mission driven in that way with what's once directly impacted you, I think is a really again, it's just a way to project that outward and to let it out, I think, in a really effective way.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. It's pretty much what I do as well. I know that women's issues are something that really, really strike a chord with me, just having faced so many, issues in my career related to that part of my identity. So I volunteer specifically for a lot of women supporting causes, and I know that makes me feel a little bit more as though I'm actually doing something to move and advance the community forward, and the narratives that I want to push forward. So I think that's a great suggestion. So going back to your current work, what are you hoping to accomplish while you're in office, and what's next for you? What are you aspiring to do in your career, in your professional life, personal life, all that jazz?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I'll start with the first half of that. So, some of the things that I've already been able to accomplish while serving on the Board of Education is that we were able to get this piece of legislation passed and signed by Governor Pritzker that seeks to highlight the positive contributions of Muslims taught in history, which I think growing up, I only saw one specific narrative of Muslim Americans taught in the classroom. And frankly speaking, it was just 9/11. And that's the only instance by which Muslims came up in history books. But we've had so many contributions from art to math to science, technology, literature that we all wanted integrated into our classroom teaching. So the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition spearheaded this initiative, and I was able to testify in front of the Illinois General Assembly. I had 2 minutes to give my spiel, and it was passed, which I think is super exciting. And then with that, I've been able to see the way that our state senator has really stepped up in a leadership role and capacity. So now we also have Asian American curriculum embedded and incorporated and taught in classrooms. So a lot of that educational focus and curriculum focused at the statewide level has been a priority of mine. So following along, being supportive, signing witness slips, all of that goes a really long way. And at a micro scale in the school district that I serve on, everything from changing Christopher Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day as an initiative that we were all able to organize around and change in our boards, to having different holidays highlighted on our school calendars, such as Diwali, Rosh Hashanah, Eid al-Fitr, Ramadan, more than just the typical holidays that we see, such as Christmas and Easter. So I think that was something that I'm really proud of as well. But I hope to advance equity and to have a bit more equity-focused lens in our hiring practices in our schools. And that's something that's been an initiative for a lot of our board members as well. So I've been really proud to be working with such a supportive board. We actually have an all-women board now, which is kind of cool because we didn't have any women on the board like 5 years ago, and now we have an all-women board. So it's really exciting to see how all of that has changed and just to be a part of that. I'm writing a book which will come out hopefully in September called Courage. So that's been one personal project that I've been working on the side. And I do have aspirations to run for higher public office in the future. Who knows when that'll be? They say it's 80% the right time for public office and 20% talent, effort, and energy. So just keeping an eye on different positions and seats. We'll see what opens up. And outside of that, my day job is that I work at Google. So that's what I do from 9 to 5. And that's really fun as well, just because it's super challenging. And I've got to work with really amazing people. So I think the sky is the limit, not just for me, but for all of us. And I always like to push people to think beyond just the typical molds that they have set for themselves. There's so much that we can do in our lives and in our day. And I think you're also a living, breathing example of that. So shout out to you for this podcast and this mission and this community that you're creating. And thank you a ton for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for being here. I really think that your message is going to resonate with a lot of people. And clearly you're not doing enough. No, I'm kidding. You've got so much going on, and I just love hearing all about it. And I think that you are truly a gift, and we do need to see a lot more people like you at the level of leadership that you are pursuing and are currently at. So thank you so much for your gift and for resonating so much with our Quo community. Well, Bushra, I'd love to have you back when that book of yours comes out. Congrats on that, by the way. But thank you for kicking off the first Quo episode as a guest.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation. You asked such thoughtful questions, some that I've never been asked before, which really led me to reflect on my journey, my upbringing, and just the way that I am. So very well done. And I'm super excited to see where the Quo heads next. And again, truly an honor to be your first guest.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Thank you once again, Bushra. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Hey, it's me again. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, and I really hope you did, please subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming service so that you're notified when new episodes are posted. Also, be sure to follow the Quo on social media at The Quo Media across all platforms for the latest and greatest. Thanks again for joining, supporting, and uplifting the Quo community, or as I like to call it, our Quohort. Catch you next time.